From the 809 Restaurant and Lounge in the heart of Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Darren Sims, and today we are turning our spotlight on theater producer Melissa Moschuto. Melissa is a director, writer, and producer, and the founding artist director of The Anthropologists, a theater group dedicated to the collaborative creation of investigative theater that inspires action. Melissa holds a BA in theater from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and has led devised workshops for Hofstra University, Brooklyn Arts Exchange, the Berkshire Fringe, among many others. We're going to talk about her work, how she goes about it, and very much more. But first, Melissa, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's great to see you in person.
Thank you. It is a joy to see you in person.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. Yeah, I feel very fortunate. My family, we're all healthy. We have these little inklings of hope around us now that vaccinations have rolled out. So feeling very fortunate.
Feels like we're moving forward, right?
Yeah, definitely. I just, the vibe is so different in my neighborhood. I'm in Washington Heights on the corner of 181 and Cabrini, so lots of restaurants there, and you can just feel the buzz in the air.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe it, but it seems there is a plausible feeling of optimism.
Yeah.
It's like the pandemic is waning,
Mm-hmm.
and if I recall correctly, in March of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
You were just about to open the barn play that
Yeah.
you were directing for another local group called Up Theater, and was also finishing up, I think, if I'm right, the tour of Artemisia's Intent.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's amazing to see where you were then and where you are now, because you've done a host of virtual programming. But it's not so easy for practitioners just pick up where you left off, is it?
No. And I don't necessarily even want to pick up where I left off. There's certainly, I have a great sadness that a barn play has not yet received its premiere. Like, that was just, one of those terrible times where we were in the middle of technical rehearsals, in the middle of building the set, and now trying to grapple with a public health crisis that at that time, we had no idea what was about to roll in. However, I think, I feel it and I hear it in the theater community at large and just in New York City at large that we have to emerge in a different way, in different relationships with each other, with our art making, with our working. So I'm trying to remain optimistic about that as well, that the lessons that we've learned over this past really incredibly difficult year, can have a lasting positive impact.
And just to go, because you said it,
Yeah.
What personal lessons have you learned?
It's interesting looking at the end of a barn play when we had to stop, because you're in theater. There's that adage, the show must go on.
Yeah.
And I've worked in indie theater forever.
It's just for those of you who aren't aware of what indie theater means, think of what MacGyver did for a living.
Yeah.
Paper clips,
Absolutely.
Glad bags, bubble gum, bottle caps, whatever it takes, we pick up off the street and we'll use it to make the show go on.
That's funny because I did have a set for the Anthropologists years ago that was all made of cardboard that was found on the street, bundled up outside of liquor stores and stuff, and it was transformed into this gorgeous set. But we can talk about that later. Totally, I feel like anyone who works in indie theater, off Broadway, whatever you want to call it, the unwritten line on the bio is, throw me any challenge and I will deal with it. And this was my first big freelance directing gig, and Up Theater hired me, which was such a thrill because I've been following them for just as long as I've had my company.
Sure. Great neighborhood group.
Yeah, and there we were at this critical juncture, about to start tech, and to be confronted with the fact that it was going to be shut down, or should we shut down? Because we started having these conversations before Broadway shut down, and then even after that, in the rest of the theater community, I think there was like this question of like, oh, well, maybe because we're smaller and there's not as many people, like we can still go on. And it was just incredibly challenging because my gut was like, we have to do this, or we got to get production photos. Like, can we do a run through? Also to honor everyone's work that we had put in for months. And I have sat with many of those moments over the past year with not a little bit of regret about, for a theater maker that considers myself people focused, right? That I was so passionate about honoring the work of the people over, I guess, the safety of the people, not understanding what this pandemic was going to be. So I've sat with that a lot and just trying to figure out like how can we move forward in a way that truly keeps everybody safe and healthy while they're doing the work.
Well, I think it's really incredibly thoughtful of you to understand where you've been and where you're going and what you can take from it. Because, yeah, you can't go home again. You can't go back to where it was, but you can move forward with what you learned from there. And I do feel like the industry has had to change in many ways. Theater industry, all arts, be honest with you, across the board. But it was the right decision for everyone to stop and to move forward. And I want to talk about how you move forward as a company, because for lack of a better term, you are the anthropologist. Even though you have, it's like people think like, it's funny. I think we share a kindred spirit sometimes, because when we talk, it's Melissa and I talk from time to time, and working on different projects. And then people think we have like the staff working for us. And it's just like, no, it's just us and the doozers from Fraggle Rock behind us, building things for. I mean, it's like we don't have like elves and gypsy. It's right. Just us. We don't have like this whole harem of people working. It's just like we are always willing this into existence. So I always find it very interesting that anthropologists is a devised group, because you're the one. Even though you're such a collaborative person to work with, it has to come from you to begin with. So, but I will say though, because I have followed pretty much everything you've ever done, it's the nature of your work is what I really wanted to get at. So the anthropologist creates its original productions through an ensemble devised methodology using improvisation, composition, highly stylized movement, which is inspired by found text and source material and artifacts. I'm getting that out of the way. I want to get the whole like what is devised theater kind of thing. I don't want to go there because I think that's just a never-ending like rabbit hole that you'll never find.
The best definition of that I ever heard was, as many people, artists, companies are doing devised theater, like they'll all have different definitions.
Yeah.
So
and so I feel it's like find what works for you, which is what I'm going to get at. So as the founder and the leader of this group, which means you do bring people to help you, I'm curious where you began and felt at home in this system of your devised work for creating work, and if you could recall any validating moments where you realized that this pathway was valid for you and working for you.
Oh, I love that question, and I thank you so much for it. And also, before we completely move on, I did want to say that Up Theater is committed to remounting a barn play. So a barn play, the barn doors will be open again at some point. We're looking at an excerpted performance in June, which will probably already have happened by the time you're listening to this. But hoping that next year we will be able to remount. So yeah, this question of a validating moment in making theater with the anthropologists and in a devising way. Yeah. I always go back immediately to the first big play that we ever did, because that really planted the seeds for like the foundation, the anchor of the work. And it really was in this opportunity to resurrect lost history and find not just any voices, but women's voices that had so often been relegated to the footnotes and not part of any historical narrative. And that was so powerful. And in this case, our first show was Give Us Bread. We were telling the story of immigrant women in the Lower East Side in 1917 who rioted against rising food prices. And, when I started that project, you could, search on the internet, you wouldn't really find anything about the food riots. I was in the main branch of the library, looking at books, copying things by hand because I couldn't take them out. This was before the days of just taking a photo with your phone of everything. Finding newspaper articles in the Yiddish forward and getting those translated. And now, if you search 1917 food riots, you'll find a whole bunch of writing on it. But that moment of the culmination of that project and seeing this moment in these women's lives resurrected on stage was so powerful. And even after that, a family got in touch with me who they were the descendants of one of the characters in the play. And we connected years later. And just to know that we're part of the legacy of Marie Gans and so many other women's lives, that is the driving force for me.
Well, and I'm curious how that has evolved over the years, because I've seen it evolve. So you've been, the one show that sticks out in my mind is The Anthropologist Saves the World.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and there have certainly been other times where we go a little off the rails. And it's not always about resurrecting historical voices. In that case, we were really contemplating, I guess, our future selves in a changing world that is being changed by climate change and grappling with scientific data. Yeah. I'm wondering if you were at the performance that we had. So our motto is where art meets action, and we really are trying to find these inroads into getting the audience to grapple with the issues that we're grappling with, and maybe go out and make a change or learn a little something more. And in that case, the show was asking, do we have the capacity as individuals to change, to adapt in the face of climate change? I think we were a little bit pessimistic in that show, but
maybe a little bit.
We decided to survey the audience as they were going in as sort of part of this pre-show thing. And there was one show that we were on the ball, and we surveyed every single person who came into the New Ohio, and the audience was very quiet that night. I think probably because the survey had to do with your environmental choices and do you eat meat, and then it was sort of replayed for them by the end of the show.
As a group.
Yeah.
A little judgy there, huh? It's okay to say
maybe,
yes.
But I will say, for that show, we challenged ourselves as a team. We said everyone has to adopt an eco challenge.
Right.
Can we actually make a change in our lives? And as the artistic director and the director of the show, I had to go big. So my challenge was, I'm giving up meat for the whole rehearsal period and through the production. And I will say, for the most part, that was 2017. For the most part, I've stuck with that. I've had my moments. Certainly in the pandemic, being huddled at home and wanting comfort food, there were times that I strayed from being a vegetarian. But we don't.
We forgive you. You should forgive yourself.
Okay. No. This is part of the. I live in the gray area. I think that's also something about our process and devising, and it's always challenging our perceptions, our capacities, our own internal narratives, right? And you have to be willing to both change how you're thinking, how you're approaching, even working together, and also offer yourself some forgiveness and a little bit of grace.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's it's okay, even though that particular production, I don't think I was exactly at their show. That to answer your question, I don't think I was at.
Well, now I'm curious what you're.
I don't think I was at that particular production, but which is I think that kind of have a fondness when you said that. It's like, were you at that show? It's like, I miss being like at a specific show and having that odd one-off event happen that never happened any other time. And so I miss that kind of togetherness and specialness of live performance.
Yeah.
But to your point, like, it's funny you say like you played in the gray area, because like that show was so in your face. It was very much a social commentary, and it was a forceful, you guys better get with it
by the end,
or it's just all coming down to nothing, and there's not gonna be anything left. And I mean, your voice is loud and clear with I would say the very Odette's waiting for lefty agitation propaganda. It's like, it's this way, folks. If you don't believe me, watch the end of the play. And so I think it's okay. So my point is like being judgy. Judgy is okay when you have a specific agenda you're trying to achieve, art meaning action, if you will. And that's why I think that it's very interesting to see how you all work. Not just working together in the room, but working towards an idea. Which I always thought was wonderful, how your shows center around a larger idea to find their place. And even if you are pushing one side more than perhaps another side, you have to have the one without, you can't have one without the other. So I feel like you do have a fairness to your work. So I want to make sure I said that out loud. But let's talk about No Pants in Tucson.
Yeah.
Okay. It's such a great name for an album cover, I think. No Pants in Tucson.
It might become an album.
It's like a Patti Smith lost bootleg somewhere, it seems like it. So fundamentally, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously it's still evolving.
Yeah.
It's a play about gender oppression. Specifically, the regulating what is and what is not appropriate for the female body. So where did the spark come from that decided to develop the idea for this project?
Yeah, so this was back in 2018. And we were nearing the end of a residency that we had at Abrons Art Center, the other end of the world, as far as we're concerned, up here in Inwood, way down on the Lower East Side. And at the time, I just had stumbled across it actually was like a clothing ad, and it was talking about how in France, it was only recently that a law had been overturned that prohibited women from wearing pants, which just seemed so laughable, right? And then I started investigating the counterpart to that law in the United States and came across a host of laws that were, I would say that most of them were on the ridiculous side. And even as we started to dig further, there were certainly some that fell into the category of urban legends. I think our favorite one that I've never been able to find the actual legal text or the inciting incident is an unmarried woman in Florida may not buy a parachute on a Sunday. Now, where that came from, I don't know, but it was fodder, great inspiration for a lot of exploration there.
I just want to meet the woman who tried.
Exactly.
Because that's why the law exists.
Yeah, totally.
And what was the kerfluffle surrounding that?
Yes, absolutely. And when we founded this company back in 2008, it really was with this desire to explore people in time and space and to use either the past, in the case of historical documents, artifacts, or scientific inquiry, where we've done a lot of work using climate change data and science. So either the past or future projections to understand where we are right now, to recontextualize where we are. So it's that, curiosity, where exactly, who's that person that tried to buy the parachute on Sunday? And we really, the other important thing about that piece in time is that it was when Brett Kavanaugh's nomination was announced. And my co-collaborator, Mariah Frieda, and I were very concerned. Not concerned about our rights to buy a parachute, concerned about our reproductive rights, and that his appointment was going to be a big threat to that. And we were curious about, can we use these archaic laws, can we explore those to talk about what is the cost of gender oppression? What does it mean to have some of these laws still on the books, even if they may not be enforced? Is there a scenario in which they start to be enforced? And so that's where the seeds were planted. That was the first provocation. And at the time, we were getting ready for our first tour of Artemisia's Intent, which is a solo show that we created. It was the first solo show we devised as an ensemble. It was 5 of us who created that play that follows the life of Artemisia Gentileschi, a 17th century Italian painter, and really is our way of looking at what happens when women have been left out in art or are pigeonholed into certain roles, whether they are the artist, the creator, or they are the subject, and looking at the gatekeepers of women. And I'll just share that when we did tour it in fall of 2018, it was during the Kavanaugh hearings, and there were distinct, if not verbatim, echoes during those hearings, quotes that people were listening to on CNN or wherever they were showing the live hearings that were in the play itself, which was based on trial testimony from the 1600s. So what we may think of as the past, it really is still here with us. That was 400 years ago. We're looking at, so for No Pants in Tucson, we're looking at laws, city ordinances in particular, that prohibited cross-dressing. These proliferated in the 1850s, around the time that dress reform was starting to be a thing, and women were saying, we shouldn't have to wear corsets, we shouldn't have to wear big skirts, we should be able to wear bloomers and pants, which was just outrageous because it was tied to women's right to vote. So this law came into play and then was since weaponized against women seeking employment, women seeking equal wage, women in gay and lesbian relationships, transgender people. And we can see that 150 years later, these rules, maybe they're not in actual law right now, but they are certainly part of our cultural policy.
It's funny how the past becomes your present, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why Shakespeare, your classics, they're classics for a reason.
They endure.
They endure, and there's, it is funny how, or you see a great indie play like yours about climate change or about women's rights that has a specific resonance because these issues keep coming up. It has kept coming up for all time. Mm-hmm. However, that generation dealt with it. It's funny how we inherit problems of the generations, and by doggone it, we will parachute on Sundays if we can. I want all women to be able to parachute on a Sunday, but
it might be the closing scene of the play. I don't know.
I think it's funny that it's because it is all related. And I think that'd be awesome. It's like your chandelier from
yeah.
Phantom.
Yeah.
Here comes the parachute. It's wonderful that you attack it with such veracity, and I think that it's important that what I've always enjoyed about the devisement of your work is that it brings in the real life aspects of these. It's real circumstances. It's not something that you're playwriting. Yes, there's playwriting as far as perhaps what glues the scenes together, and there's a lot of form and body and story. Mm-hmm. But it's rooted in a hard truth of what we've experienced in society, and to borrow the phrase, you are holding the mirror up to nature mm-hmm. Very well to say this is what you need to think about America, or wherever you're watching it now. We're Zoom friendly to all the corners of the globe.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what I've always enjoyed about your work.
Well, thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Um,
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit more about our process in that, when we start working, we have this provocation, this question, in this case, we're asking, what is the cost of gender oppression? But we are very playful about engaging with those questions. We're bringing in newspaper articles, photographs, charts, legal text, whatever it is that is creating the foundation for the work. And we're going and playing in the rehearsal room and making discoveries. And the way we set up our work is that everyone's whole self is welcome. And so it becomes very personal, even if we might not be sharing our own personal life stories. Inevitably, that does happen. But there is a great deal of personal investment in the creation of the work. And then as it evolves, we do shift into our different primary artistic roles: performer, designer, writer, director. But the script does come last in our work.
Well, I love how the way you develop ideas. What are your plans for premiering it in 2021 or 2022? And I think this is an important question, kind of putting the cart before the horse in a sense, but how has the pandemic played into the creation and the way you intended to present the play before? Because you said you started in 2018, and yes, we're all about process, so I'm not going to get in that argument. Or the whole idea of when is the show even finished? That's a podcast for another time. But I'm just curious how, and how bringing your whole selves to the room has changed because the core of the play is still the core of the play. That's not going to change. But I'm curious of how the way you're telling the story, if that's changed.
Absolutely. This year, oh my gosh, this year changed so much. I will say that personally, as a theater maker, I'm a traditionalist. Like, I want to be in the theater. I want the lights. I want the, all the things that go with putting on a show. So I was pretty resistant at first to diving into the world of Zoom theater and online theater. We still were doing some things on Zoom. We had meetings already on Zoom because several of us are parent artists, and it's a lot easier to do a video call than to find a mutually satisfying geographical located coffee shop, right? So we immediately pivoted to continuing the devising process online, in part because we had a workshop set up for the spring. I had actors in place, I had a budget in place, and then everything shut down and everyone lost their jobs. I'm not saying I was paying a ton, but for a time, we might have been the only money that was coming in to some of our performers. And this was a way to keep us grounded and keep us rooted. But the beautiful thing is that it opened up my eyes to the artistic vision of my collaborators. It's one thing to be in the room together and saying, okay, we're all going to go play. But then when everyone's creating separately, we found out, Tess is really great at video editing. Mariah loves writing songs and wrote some original music, and all these other talents that came to life in the storytelling that we wouldn't have done if we were in the rehearsal room together. So that opened up new possibilities for storytelling around the play. This was in conjunction to doing these very small Zoom sessions with friends and supporters where we were like, hey, look at this little video that we made based on this person's story. And we realized our audience was really into that. And my friend, who might be your friend too, Peter Michael Marino, said, and he's a theater maker, solo artist, said, I think you have something bigger than just one play here. And that clicked for me. So that initiated a digital storytelling project. where we gave actors a budget and said, choose one character or a historical figure from our research and go make something about them. It can be any format you want it to be. Go be creative. And the anthropologist became a producing entity in that regard, where I was working with Lindy Rosario, our dramaturg, and Lucy Azalinas, our new assistant producer, and we were like, what can we do to support you as an artist? And Tess made an incredible experimental film, and Mariah made a fabulous phone play. You can call a number and get immersed into this world. Irina, our visual designer, did a whole costume exploration that another actor, Marissa Joy Stamps, did a voiceover for. And it actually relieved a little bit of the pressure of making the play, in the sense that when you're devising, so much ends up on the cutting room floor, right? You're like, oh, that character was really interesting, but they're not going to make it into the full play. Or they are, but we're not going to get their full life story. So now we can actually highlight more people, more women in this creative process. We have a singer behind us.
This is what happened.
Do they want to be in the show? No. Well, I will say, we do intend to produce the play in 2021. We're looking at this fall, with all the mysteries that producing mid or post-pandemic brings. But, we feel that optimism of we're slowly on the road to being almost fully vaccinated as an acting company, and proceeding with caution, but really want to create a live theater experience. We do physical theater.
Right.
Like, we're an ensemble. We need to be in the same room.
I'm curious. What I love what you said that, and I can't wait. I'm very hopeful you'll be back in the fall in somehow, some way, in person.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Over the past 2 years, a lot of things have changed with activism finding its way into popular culture. Mm-hmm. I hope it will serve your company well, because I think a lot of the issues you tackle has bubbled up through activism and social justice, whether it's larger movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matters, and immigration being front and center, through gender parity and equal rights. I'm curious, and I don't know, and I don't expect you to know, but I'd like for you to guess, because you're front and center. What you're saying, bringing people in because you're saying it's larger than just a play. There's a lot of different things happening for that one particular section of the producing elements. We're seeing it so much in our popular culture day to day. Do you think it will affect in-person box office, coming in person to? Because I think it's funny. I don't know if it's a double-edged sword, saying I see it every day and I'm with you, but I'd rather watch Hello Dolly tonight at home, which is totally different. Or I am so with you, and yes, I want to see more tonight. I'll be there at 8 o'clock with bells on, and I'm bringing a friend. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what your thoughts and feelings are on that, because culture has changed a bit.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting once there was the proliferation of theater online, in that, so I have 2 children. They go to school here in Inwood. They are 7 and 8.5. So when they were very little, there was a stretch of time where I didn't even think I was going to get out of the house again, let alone go see a show, right? And there were so many shows or events or theatrical gatherings that I couldn't be a part of. And in that way, I did appreciate so much how many people were creating spaces to gather online. And it was like, yes, this level of accessibility is so incredibly important. That being said, I definitely used this time to catch up on movies and Netflix when I could. Online content, digital content, online events is never going to go away. It is not there's not going to be a magical line where it's like, oh, ding, ding, we're back in person. We don't have to do stuff online. So I fully anticipate that we will continue creating digital content, that we will continue doing events. Last night we did the first event in a new programming series called Resetting the Table. So these are conversations that we're hosting around gender, public policy, and public office. So last night we spoke with 4 women candidates for city council, and I hope to continue those conversations. And we, for the first time we had live ASL interpretation, which I'm so thrilled that we were able to do. And I think this past year has lit a fire in me to work towards greater accessibility in my own producing, which is so often hard. As you know, in New York City, finding a space that is accessible is like a needle in a haystack. Yeah. But that can't be our excuse anymore. We have to find more ways to make the work accessible. And the other fire is really actively and every day practicing anti-racism. So this past year, we did step back a bit from producing content and really stopped and had to check in with like how we were making work and really interrogate all of our practices and see where systems or structures or best practices were actually failing people or stopping people from working with us. We've done a lot of work around that and are committed to being an anti-racist theater company and organization. So all of those things are intersecting. It's always hard to get to sell tickets, right, and to get an audience. I hope that once people are ready to get back into the theater and once we have live performances happening, that people will crave that in-person experience. I mean, in my opinion, nothing can replace being in the room where it happened, being in the theater. Can we bring that to more people by live streaming a production or by filming and then later making it available? Sure, I know it's not going to be the same, but this is something that we're going to try and do. And, you know, I don't also mean to say that like the play is going to be super didactic or judgy, and that, you know, audiences who have met us along this journey as we're creating the play and have now seen other content, you know, my wish is that their curiosity has been piqued and they'll finish the journey with us in the theater.
Well, I think that's a wonderful world to strive for on stage.
Yeah.
To create that area where accessibility, however which way it can be, you know, all roads lead there. It's about the work, and it's about creating an access point to that work. And I fully agree with you. I feel virtual programming should be used as a tool. I am of a certain age. I will say that I prefer live myself because I like being in the room where it happens. I like you said, having that unique experience where I did get that piece of paper going in, and then something random happened that will never happen again.
There's such a
was
visceral
glorious
experience, right?
You're sharing the breath. It's like I use the term quite a bit, saying I love like going into a room with complete strangers and coming out with friends afterwards. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? It's like, 'cause we have all shared this experience that we will never share again. It was unique into itself, and that's the beauty of that particular moment in time. It's about associating those moments together. So I agree. I feel like if we can try to find ways to keep associating accessible access points, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person with ASL, and also ADA accesses. Don't forget that. We need to find ways, and of course, race, gender, religion, check all the boxes, and that's what I hope I'm achieving with Inwood Artworks, keeping an open signal, wide open platform for whoever whoever and however. And I think that's what we have to do. And so I applaud you for taking the step back. And it's not about quantity and pushing things out. It's about finding a system that works for you, and taking a look at that system periodically and reassessing how you want to move forward with the work. And I think you're quite on the way of doing that.
Well, thank you. And I think, Aaron, about that you have found and made space up here in Inwood where people didn't see that before, right? Like when I first moved to New York City, I was on the corner of Broadway and Cummings, right by the library. Then I relocated, that was just for summer. Then when I moved to the city permanently, it was like Washington Heights. And there was always this idea like, oh yeah, all the arts people, all the theater people live uptown. But nobody was making theater uptown. And you have created physical space and, I don't know, would you say metaphysical space for artists to gather. And, whether it is a theater performance or I'm thinking about going into the gallery, where now the library has relocated temporarily.
That's what happens when you create space.
Right.
Other people would... Full disclosure, the library people came to our opening night at one of our opening night galleries and they go, this is really nice. Because they couldn't imagine the space like that. It took someone, I'll just say, like me, or whatever, or me in this case, to say, you know what, that'd be a really great art gallery, and put it up there, and then people see, wow, that space actually is usable, and that space can actually be a meeting place.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm happy to say that we did what we did there, and it's being used, and a library is there for the time being until they build a new one.
Right.
So,
but that's something that we share, that we're able to envision something new, maybe recontextualize a space or a community for people, and there's such great power in that, especially when it does happen in person. I think about like the people I met and the neighbors that I chatted with at the art gallery, and now the art that I own because I was the winning bidder on several pieces.
That's great.
So I just admire so much the spaces that you've made to highlight so many artists, and you've changed the landscape for Upper Manhattan and arts. You're one of those people, along with Up Theater Company and People's Theater Project, and that will also be interesting now that neighborhoods are so important, even more important, I think, post-pandemic. Can there be more art spaces here in our backyard?
I think there can be. I bet my company on it.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I doubled down long time ago on that here, and I'm a firm believer that it will, and I think we won't know. I think it's going to be a long, slow burn, and it may not be for the better. I'll just say, as far as spaces and opportunities and jobs throughout the end of 2021, even going to 2022. Even though I have great optimism for rekindling theater and live events, but it's going to take full capacity to be able to. Can't do things piecemeal. We have to have everybody on board, vaccination wise / just I would say spiritually speaking, and I mean spiritually means like we're not timid, we're not afraid, we're not holding ourselves back. We have to move forward as a community. Not just the problems you were addressing through the anthropologists, taking on, gender identity and racism and climate change and so many other things. We have to move forward as a group saying we need to make space for ideas. We need to make space for ideas to be explored, and they need to be able to fail gloriously. And also celebrate the ones that made it through, that'll lead to other ones.
Absolutely.
And I think that's how we grow as a community, because that's when the debate comes in, and that's how we learn and focus to move forward. So I think it's going to be a little bit of adjustment period, but I'm so glad that you've created this virtual content, soon to be live content, and just so we know, now is this virtual content available in perpetuity on your website?
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
And where is it?
You can go to www.theanthropologist.org/no-pants-digital, or there's a link on the homepage too. And that's where you can see everything that has been created to date. And we are making plans to do another round of digital content later this summer, early fall. And we'll see how it continues to roll out. So we'd love for you to visit.
Awesome. We'll put a link up to the anthropologist page on our episode description of this podcast, so you guys can go right there and hit the link and be right in the anthropologist's wonderful page and creation.
Thank
Witness all for
you.
yourselves. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for the invitation.
You bet. Great to see you in person. And, it's just wonderful to have real life interactions. And I look forward to more things coming up in 2021, 2022.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks to Melissa Moschuto for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now, if you will, and rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really does help us. And please share it with your friends. Many thanks to 809 Restaurant and Lounge at 112 Dyckman Street here in Inwood for hosting us, and to HideSites.com for local uptown promotional support. Be sure to follow us on social media at Inwood Artworks to keep up with all that we do, including the Inwood Film Festival, Filmmakers Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. You can also support us and all of our programming by making a tax-free donation at Inwood Artworks at NYC/donate. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and in part by a grant from NYC Company Foundation with partial support from Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.